各位精油爱好者们，大家早上好。I am Owen Messick. I represent doTERRA China, and I'm so very grateful that we could join together for today's International Science and Education Seminar.
大家好，大家早上好，我是代表多特瑞中国的麦欧文，很高兴今天有机会能够参与到今天的论坛当中。
doTERRA is the official sponsor of today's event, and we're so very grateful to be the sponsor to bring more essential oil knowledge to all of you, to all the world, to more around China and to around the world.
多特瑞是今天活动的主要的赞助者，我们也很荣幸能有这样的机会，借此将精油知识传播给更多国内和国外的朋友。
At doTERRA, our motto is pursue what's pure, and that certainly goes for essential oils. Our oils are 100% pure and natural product containing some very beneficial ingredients to all of our customers.
那多特瑞一直追求的都是至真至纯，这也体现在我们的精油产品当中。我们所有的精油产品都是100%纯正、纯天然，其中的有效成分可以帮助到我们的顾客。
As you've just heard from Mr. Chen, we're so grateful for his presentation and his association for hosting this event. As you just heard from him, the essential oil industry is really growing quickly and has such a huge potential for continued growth here in China.
那非常感谢刚刚陈理事长给我们带来的分享，也感谢他能够组织这样一场活动。从刚刚他的分享当中，我们可以听到在中国精油市场将会持续快速的增长的同时，还仍然有巨大的潜力等待我们去发掘。
If you look at it in any way in terms of the health market in China, growing consumers in China, people looking for natural solutions, any way you look at the essential oil market in China, from any third-party survey that we have done, we continue to see a very, very high rate of growth and accelerated growth into the future.
那其实无论是我们看到中国整个大健康产业的发展，还是我们整个消费能力的提升，还是人们对精油纯天然产品不断喜爱的增加，都可以看出精油市场能够不断的快速发展。我们从任何之前所做的第三方调研当中所得出的结论也和此相符。
Now, doTERRA is the professional essential oil company, and what do we mean by that?
多特瑞也是一家专业的精油公司，那么专业意味着什么呢？
Well, we are the world's largest essential oils company, and we sell the highest quality of essential oils of any company in the world.
首先，多特瑞是全球最大的精油企业，同时我们销售的精油产品也是质量是全世界排前的。
And as the world's leader, we are committed to bringing more science about essential oils, more studies about essential oils. So we cooperate with many different universities and interested scientists to develop and continue to develop the science of essential oils. And that's why we're so proud to sponsor today's event.
作为精油企业、精油行业的领引者，多特瑞一直致力于精油知识的传播，这也是为何我们与相关的一些科学院校和科学家不断的合作，来促进精油知识的发展。这也是为何我们选择赞助今天这样的活动。
And also we are the professional essential oil company because we have a very large and wide range of essential oils available to all of our consumers to fit any need they might have regarding essential oils. So if you're looking for the right quality essential oils and the right kind of essential oils, you need look no farther than doTERRA essential oils.
多特瑞专业的另一个体现就是体现在我们非常广阔、非常全面的精油品类，那可以给我们的各消费者满足他们各种各样的需求。如果你想寻求高品质的精油，想寻找到非常全面的品质的精油的话，那多特瑞将是你的不二选择。
Now, as we have done studies by ourselves at doTERRA and also using third parties, it's interesting to note that 90% of the companies out there that sell essential oils do not sell pure essential oils. They might add something to their oil, or they may even change the oil from its original appearance, or they may add artificial ingredients and chemicals to their essential oils.
其实无论是多特瑞自己做的一些市场调研，还是和第三方的一些机构所做的一些调研，结果都显示，其实在现在市场上所售卖的精油，80%到90%都不是真正的纯正精油，它们亦或是添加了一些其他的一些化学成分，也有可能它所声称的成分和它实际的内涵根本就是不相符的。
And that's why it's so important that we are continuing to work with Mr. Chen and his association, and we really appreciate his really hard work in developing essential oil standards. And you saw from his slide that there are 2 essential oil standards that we worked hand in hand with him to develop so that consumers can know what is a high quality essential oil.
这也是为什么我们选择和像陈理事长和他协会一起能够合作。大家从他刚刚的分享当中也可以看出，其实我已经宣布了很多的一些精油的相应的团标和标准，其中也包括多特瑞的2项标准。正是通过与他们这样的合作，发布更多的精油标准，才能够让我们顾客明白什么样的精油才是高品质的。
And so we at doTERRA want to continue to deepen our partnerships and relationships with various scientific institutions and various scientists regarding essential oils, and we do that around the world.
而多特瑞也将会继续在全球范围内与更多的科研机构和科学家进行合作，来促进精油科学。
And right here in China, we will also continue to develop these very close partnerships and bring more essential oil knowledge to China. And again, with our opening of our Research and Development Center in Shanghai in November, this will also be another milestone for doTERRA and for our mission of bringing essential oil science and knowledge to the consumers in China.
而在中国，我们也会继续与相应的科研机构进行合作，来传播正确的精油科学知识。在今年11月份，我们的上海研发中心将会正式开业，这也是多特瑞推进科学传播的又一个里程碑。我们未来将会继续把这一份精油传播精油知识的使命坚持下去。
But more important than any science that we can talk about is the importance it has to you who use essential oils in your daily life. You know how wonderful these products can be, how they can help your family and your health, and how they can improve your life.
而相比于精油科学，更重要的是，其实是我们的顾客在日常当中如何去使用这些精油。大家在使用之后都可以知道这是多么棒的产品，如何透过正确好的精油，能够帮助自己和自己的家庭提高自己的健康和生活。
So we invite any of you who are new to essential oils to continue to learn more about essential oils. The more you learn, the more you will love these wonderful products, the more you will use these products, and probably you will also start to share your knowledge with others. That's the common pattern for people who really love and know essential oils, and particularly doTERRA essential oils.
所以我也鼓励我们很多精油的新朋友，大家可以花更多的时间去学习精油。学习的越多，你就会更多的爱上它，爱上它之后，你又会更多的使用它，之后便会情不自禁的去分享精油的知识。这其实正是一个典型的精油，尤其是多特瑞精油的一个使用者的旅程。
So thank you for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentation.
所以非常感谢大家今天的参与，希望大家能够从后面的分享当中获得更多的知识。
好，谢谢大家。
好，谢谢麦欧文总裁的分享。那在他的分享当中呢，我们看到了精油市场的巨大潜力和杰出精油公司的努力。那相信呢，精油行业能在如此优秀的企业的示范下变得越来越好。那看完了企业的努力接下来我们就要来看一看科研人士和精油专家们为精油行业所做出的贡献。那第一位我们要隆重邀请的专家呢，他是来自美国犹他大学的教授。由于他的英文名比较长，所以呢，业内通常都亲切地称呼他为 Dr. O。那 Dr. O 呢，在犹他大学主要从事儿科传染病的研究。 在精油领域啊，它主要专注于研究如何在健康的生活环境中开展使用精油。那同时呢 ，Dr. O 正在建立一个个人护理和预防为主的虚拟平台，可以说啊，是一位非常与时俱进的精油专家。那他本次的分享主题呢，是精油市场对纯正、一致性和科学验证的需求。接下来，让我们一起来聆听 Dr. O 的专业分享，大家欢迎。
It is a pleasure to be with you at the International Essential Oil Symposium. My name is Dr. Russell Osgathorpe. I am an adjunct associate professor of pediatrics at the University of Utah and practice pediatric infectious diseases while working for a large essential oil company in the United States. Let's talk a little bit about this need for purity, consistency, and scientific validation in the essential oil marketplace. To begin with, I know this is going to sound elementary, but I need you to think for a little bit about what an essential oil actually is. An essential oil is made by a plant in a natural process that we can extract from the plant, most usually through steam distillation. There are over 17,000 plants for which essential oils are derived, and they come from different parts of the plant. And depending on which part of the plant you distill, the essential oil you get back can be quite different. So as you can see on the figure associated with this slide, with peppermint oil, there are little saccules, little tiny containers of essential oils that are in the leaves of the peppermint leaf. And when that is rubbed and you smell it, that's what you smell, are those little tiny saccules bursting open, and pure peppermint oil comes out on your fingertips and you can smell it. So how do we obtain them? Like I said earlier, most commonly through steam distillation. There are both wet and dry methods of steam distillation, and it is important to recognize that when we bring this really carefully obtained source material to the distillery, we're going to be exposing it to both water and heat, both of which are chemical processes that modify an essential oil and change it in some degree. But it is internationally recognized that this is the most and appropriate way of gaining an essential oil from a plant. The essential oil marketplace has grown tremendously, and that is part of why there is such a need for purity, consistency, and scientific validation in our field. This tremendous growth that the industry has received over the last 15 years has been quite astronomical. As you can see here, based on the size of the pie chart, different companies fill up different quadrants. The largest part of this pie chart, the 55%, is actually a conglomeration of a multitude of very small companies. Okay, so everything smaller than 2.7 is clustered into that larger 55.5. So there are many, many hundreds of companies that fit into that very large section of the pie. Before, maybe 15 years ago, there were really only 2 companies that did this. And since then, there are now hundreds of companies in this marketplace. And that has created quite a demand. And that demand fuels this need for consistency and purity that I'm going to spend so much time on today. Put into numbers by Verify Markets, worldwide, the global aromatherapy market and essential oils market was valued at over $7.7 billion in 2019. If we look at its growth over time, you can see that in the next several years, that growth is expected to continue. And we are astounded by all of that growth. But as we become so large, we need improved standards globally, not just within one single company, but globally that hold us all to the same standard of production and quality and consistency so that scientific research can be exchanged equally between companies that market products in this space. To begin with, let's talk a little bit about the first step in this change that I feel needs to take place. Let's talk about purity and adulteration in the essential oil marketplace. So adulteration of essential oils occurs through several different ways. So for example, in the aroma enhancement perspective, an essential oil can be made to pop or made to sing by the addition of ethyl vanillin or other very tiny, minuscule amounts of chemical compounds to an essential oil that make it seem more pleasing to the human nose or aroma. We can substitute very cheap oils for more expensive oils. That's a very common way that oils are adulterated. So for instance, Boswellia serrata, a form or a species of frankincense, can be substituted for Boswellia carteri, which is a very expensive form of frankincense. But the consumer may not know that that substitution has been taken place, and it might be labeled as pure Boswellia carteri and sold for much cheaper. Cinnamon is also a very common way that essential oils are adulterated. Cinnamon oil is quite expensive. Cassia is much less expensive. And so cinnamon oil can be really quite adulterated with cassia very commonly. You can even fully reconstruct an essential oil out of thin air, for lack of a better term. So you can reconstruct peppermint oil, and this is commonly done in the flavoring and food industry. Synthetically derived adulteration is also quite common. Wintergreen is a prime example of this. Birch is another. And then dilution. Dilution is a very problematic form of adulteration because GCMS does not pick up the common dilution methods used by adulterators. The most common way that it's done is through vegetable oils. Things like castor oil, which is extremely cheap, can be added to a pure essential oil, but you only end up selling 50% of it. But because GCMS doesn't pick up, it looks like it's 100% pure. So these are the most common ways that essential oils can be adulterated. So I think it's also important that you look at that definition of adulteration that is up on the slide. So adulteration has been used as a term throughout the dietary supplement and the essential oil industry commonly, but people need to be talking about the same thing. And so the definition that I use is the intentional modification of an essential oil to enhance, extend, or recreate a pure essential oil. So let's look at an example of adulteration. This is an example of adulteration of lavender oil. This is from a study published by the National Center for Natural Product Research at the University of Mississippi's School of Pharmacy. What this research did is it looked at a particular company's essential oils, multiple different lots, multiple different batches, and found that those were all pure. Those were then labeled as a gold standard, and then many samples from industry in the second half of the graph were in the white table were compared to the gold standard for purity. And what was found is that only 2/3 of the samples in the marketplace were adulterated. And that's a highly problematic situation for lavender essential oil, which makes up the largest essential oil in the marketplace today. So when we buy essential oil of lavender in the market, we find that it's very difficult to trust what you're buying because of the significant amount of adulteration that exists. Another example of adulteration in the marketplace is bergamot essential oil. And this data is from APRC. And what we find with bergamot essential oil is that it's very commonly adulterated. In fact, the trees that exist in the world today could only produce 1/12 of the oil that is actually sold. That is a phenomenal recognition of the situation that we face. And what you commonly see with bergamot essential oil is substitutions of linalool acetate from sources that are not related to to bergamot as a plant itself. And so they supplement bergamot with sources of linyl acetate from hoe wood, for example, or other sources that are much cheaper than bergamot, and formulate a bergamot that is impure. Another example of essential oil adulteration, and probably the most egregious in my mind, is birch essential oil. So this is unpublished data currently from Dr. Prabodh Satyal, a world-recognized expert in adulteration detection in the essential oil industry. And what you find in his analysis is he looked at 18 different birch samples that are the only ones yet we know of sold on the marketplace. And of those 18, not a single one contained any birch oil at all. The ingredients that were found within what was labeled a birch oil were either wintergreen, labeled as birch, or it was synthetically derived methyl salicylate taken from, most likely, aspirin. So it's a very simple organic chemistry method to convert salicylate to methyl salicylate. And we see that as most commonly, most egregiously, 0% of any of these oils were found to contain any birch at all. So that begs the question, does adulteration of essential oils matter? Why am I making such a big deal about this? I believe it matters significantly. The reasons why are that I'm very concerned regarding synthetic contamination of essential oils with harmful substances that are byproducts of organic synthesis processes. I'm concerned about mislabeling for consumers who think they're taking one thing and using one product, but it's actually a different one. I'm also concerned for dosing inconsistency within the marketplace. If a consumer relies on a particular dose, but the product itself varies quite widely, batch to batch, bottle to bottle, then they're going to have very inconsistent results. Consistency and purity are required for reproducible results in testing for efficacy of essential oils with clinical trials. The therapeutic window of an essential oil is generally unknown in essential oil clinical applications. The therapeutic window is above a certain dose, you get side effects. Below a certain dose, you get no biological effect. If the therapeutic window is quite narrow, as it is for some compounds, then what will happen is that with inconsistency, the level may bounce around all over the place, and you might have very inconsistent results as you take the oil and might receive unwanted side effects if you bump above a certain level. Conflicting data also leads to confusion and to doubt in the marketplace about the efficacy of essential oils from both research institutions, scientists, and consumers. Let's give you some examples of this. For example, here is a clinical trial on bergamot essential oil saying that it reduces anxiety. I've highlighted in the orange there the fact that the clinical trial showed that bergamot essential oil actually in this randomized clinical trial showed that it reduced the anxiety of the patients who used it. However, just a couple of years later, bergamot essential oil in another trial showed no effect at all in reducing anxiety. How is that possible? One of the standards of good science and good data is that it is reproducible. So when you have conflicting data, one trial saying yes, the other trial saying no, you are at what we call clinical equipoise. You don't know what the truth is. I believe that part of the problem with these trials is that bergamot essential oil is highly adulterated. And because it is so highly adulterated, the clinical trials cannot be trusted. Let's talk a little bit about chemical consistency for a moment and why I think this is so important. In that same trial that I showed you from the National Center for National Product Research at the University of Mississippi in the United States, they looked at the gold standard for lavender quality production at a particular company over multiple batches and multiple years. And what they found was quite interesting to me. They actually found that linalool and linalool acetate, which make up about 2/3 of the chemical constituents of lavender oil, they were actually quite consistent year to year, batch to batch. And so we actually went and looked at this particular company's levels of consistency over time, batch to batch variability, and the standard deviation that existed between lavender oil. So this is peer-reviewed published data on lavender showing its consistency. And here is, from the same company, more of that data. So linalool and linalool acetate, that's the same numbers, but this is over 100 different lots of lavender. If we look at peppermint oil from this same standard, what you look at is that menthone and menthol were really quite consistent, with menthol at about 37% of the volume by weight of peppermint oil only had a standard deviation of 1.47% between 75 different lots of peppermint oil. Really quite remarkable, actually. If you look at lemon oil and grapefruit oil, we again see remarkable levels of consistency. This consistency, I want to remind you, is at one company. Okay, so if we were to do this, if we had the ability to do this with every company, I think that the variability would be astronomically high. Remember back on that lavender study, I told you that 2/3 of the lavenders were adulterated. And so because of that, wild variability would exist. When we looked at bergamot and we looked at wintergreen and birch, the variability would be wild. So here, what we see with one company's essential oils is that they've actually figured out how to make their essential oils consistent. Lemon and grapefruit, two very common citrus essential oils at this company, show that limonene at 65% only varies by 3%. Grapefruit, where limonene makes up the vast majority of its percent volume by weight, upwards of 90% of it is limonene, only had a standard deviation of 1.1%. That is as good as a manufacturing hope that I could hope for as a clinician who does research in this area. If we look at something a little less common, like geranium, what we can see is we still see within this same company levels of consistency that are being attained. This is what is currently possible in our industry, where the citronellol is at 1.59% standard deviation when the percent value is 24 that we're looking at. Okay, really quite remarkable. A couple others to keep in mind, especially as we approach the latter half of the year. When we look at frankincense essential oil, which we looked at 83 lots from this company's frankincense, alpha-pinene, which is the biggest and to me most important clinical compound found within frankincense, at 44% by volume with a standard deviation of about 4.46%. This is really good consistency within this compound. And then another one that is always good to think about is copaiba. Copaiba, when we look at beta-caryophyllene, over 25 lots of beta-caryophyllene had a standard deviation of 5.5% on a baseline of about 56% in general. Excellent levels of consistency can be achieved within our industry, but you have to fight for it very hard. Myrrh essential oil had 13 lots associated with it with a standard deviation for furanodemza 1,3-diene of 1.74. Another really excellent result. So to sum up this consistency data, what I want to help us understand is that consistency can be achieved only after adulteration is rooted out and you have a pure oil. Once you have a pure oil, consistency is possible. But you have to own that supply chain stem to stern and make sure that your essential oils and the way you source them, who you source them from, and how you do your quality assurance testing is excellent. Once you've done that, then you have high-level consistency that allows you to do clinical trials focused on safety and efficacy. Let's look at a couple of the safety trials and the safety issues associated with essential oils for the last few minutes of the talk. So, safety is different for drugs versus essential oils. Drugs are most commonly single molecular compounds, okay? Essential oils are natural complex substances, sometimes made up of dozens of chemical compounds with several primary constituents or chemical constituents. For example, lavender has 66% of its volume is made up of two clinical compounds, linalool and linalool acetate. The rest of that molecule is made up of several dozen different smaller constituent compounds. So doing safety on linalool is not enough. You have to do safety on the whole natural complex substance to understand what its implications are in a clinical setting, especially with human beings. The most common natural complex substances, as defined over here, are essential oils. But others include concretes and absolutes, oleoresins, resinoids, CO2 extracts, and infusions, and even alcoholic extracts. When you want to do a safety assessment of a drug versus a natural complex substance, safety for a drug becomes very easy. Down that single drug compound side, on the chemistry, it's a single known compound. Route of application is almost always either oral or topical or IV, right? And toxicity and safety it's a profile of one compound. So when we look at toxicity, which is generally difficult to do, it's much easier to do if you're just looking at one compound. With the natural complex substances, as you can see on this other side of the graph, it's much more complex and more difficult to do. This is best exemplified, I believe, by the difficulty that lavender has been saddled with, I believe, inappropriately because of its association with premature breast development in children. There was an article published in the New England Journal of Medicine many years ago making this association. And in recent years, scientists have presented data at the International Conference on the Science of Botanicals that showed that lavender essential oil that was implicated in these results, pictured here in that picture, the lavender-containing products, quote unquote, that caused this premature development of breast tissue in both boys and girls, did not actually contain any lavender at all. So there was no lavender in those products, yet lavender has been saddled with this for forever. So doing safety work is really important. Having pure lavender and having consistent lavender means that you can get better interpretations. If we had better standards as a community in the essential oil marketplace, this kind of association with lavender would not have been made, because there wouldn't be products that could be sold with synthetically derived or no products claiming to have lavender in them, which have no lavender at all. And we wouldn't be saddled with these kinds of associations in the marketplace and in the literature. Some work has recently been presented at the International Conference on the Science of Botanicals looking at the safety of furanocoumarins in essential oils. These are most commonly, but not only, but most commonly found in the citruses, in the citrus family. And we looked at 26 different furanocoumarins and their safety and toxicity profiles. This is the largest study to date that has been presented in a scientific forum on furanocoumarins found within essential oils, and can be used as an example of how to do safety research in this industry moving forward. Safety, I believe, as a clinician, begins with dosing. If you don't know how to dose something, it's really hard to have safety because of that therapeutic window we talked about earlier. If you can't derive a dose that is in here, you can't know where you're going to be safe. So we have recently looked at data, and this is data that is soon to be published out of the National Center for Natural Product Research at the University of Mississippi, that shows linalool compared to linalool acetate compared to lavender essential oil, human pharmacokinetics. And what you can see here are the C maximum obtained by linalool treatment compared to linalool versus linalool acetate. And these particular graphs are very important to me because they now are looking into an in vivo situation and asking, what is the maximum concentration that can be received by a single dose, a single specified dose? What's the maximum concentration we receive? And then we also get to look at what side effects, if any, were achieved at that dose, and then how fast that level falls, meaning what is that compound's half-life? That tells you how often you should use a particular product. Most of the products in our industry don't go to this level of research, and I'm suggesting that in the future, we will need to do so if we're to achieve the kinds of growth that are seen or projected by Verify Markets, which I showed you at the beginning of this talk. So let's talk about this undiscovered country of efficacy and where we need to be doing human clinical trials related to essential oils. These are essential oil clinical trials I'm going to show you that I personally am impressed with their quality. So lavender essential oil has been shown in multiple randomized clinical trials to affect mood in a positive way. So, for example, in a trial that looked at people with generalized anxiety disorder and compared them to people who were taking a SSRI, or a commonly prescribed medication for generalized anxiety disorder, they found that lavender essential oil achieved better results than placebo, so statistically significantly better than placebo, and approached statistical significance for being better than the SSRI or the drug. This type of trial has been repeated. There have been meta-analyses done several times, so a fairly standardized set of data now exists around lavender and mood, especially anxiety. The next one, where a lot of data resides, is peppermint oil for the treatment of irritable bowel syndrome. This is a meta-analysis of 9 different randomized human clinical trials that were placebo-controlled that looked at people with irritable bowel syndrome on peppermint oil and on placebo. And the overwhelming effect was that peppermint oil improves the symptom scores of people with irritable bowel syndrome far and above that of placebo. Peppermint oil works. A most recent single trial that has impressed me was just published a year ago. And this clinical trial was on lavender essential oil delivered in an aromatherapy method to improve sleep. What was unique about this trial is they actually showed that they were able to control for aroma. And you might ask yourself, well, how can you control for aroma? I know when I'm smelling something, and I know when I'm not. Well, this was a study on sleep. So they only diffused the aroma once an EEG, which are electrodes on your head, registered and told the researchers that the patient was asleep. Once the patient was asleep based on EEG, they then diffused the lavender. And what happened next was quite remarkable. They found that people who were on lavender achieved deeper sleep faster and stayed in stage 3 sleep longer than people who did not receive any lavender. Stage 3 sleep is where we are what we call restorative sleep. And that is where the brain is able to, and that cells, its neurons, are able to remove all of the toxic metabolites that they've built up over the course of the day while awake and actively thinking and doing the things that they do. Sleep restores not only our musculature and the rest of our body, but it restores our brains. And people on lavender diffused at night got better sleep. This was a group out of China, actually, that showed this research. So a very great piece of work published in the Nature family of journals. Another one that I want you to think about for efficacy was a trial that showed that copaiba essential oil decreased arthritis. So this was a study that showed that if you used copaiba also with deep blue together in patients who had arthritis scores and mobility in their hands was able to be statistically measured and statistically significantly improved. A nice piece of research. Frankincense has also been shown in an example of a case study where a patient, a 56-year-old man who used topical application of frankincense to a basal cell carcinoma that showed resolution. I will strongly warn you that this is a case study. It's not a clinical trial, but something that bears further study for sure. Clinical trials in progress that my group is working on is we're looking at cinnamon essential oil and metabolic disease, copaiba, wintergreen essential oils, and chronic low back pain. We're looking at a pharmacokinetic study for lavender essential oil. We're looking at stress and anxiety modification through mindfulness practice and using lavender essential oil. And we're also looking at sleep and lavender, as that group from China had done. We're also studying essential oils, metabolic disease, and we're looking at the PK of peppermint essential oil and focusing a lot of effort on metabolism and how essential oils can alter and improve our metabolism, especially in healthy people. So my conclusions that I'd like to draw from this are several. One, the essential oil industry struggles with adulteration, yet I've shown you that it can be overcome. Purity is not just some theoretical hill out there. It can be done, but it requires a great deal of effort. The essential oil industry as a whole has traditionally felt that consistency, year in year, batch to batch, has been impossible, but it can be achieved. In fact, we've commonly said to one another that Mother Nature is not consistent, therefore essential oils are a product of Mother Nature. They can't be consistent. They can be, actually. When purity is the standard upon which you produce your essential oils, when you source your essential oils from multiple different parts of the world, you minimize that variability. For essential oils to be used medically, standards of safety and efficacy should be collaboratively developed and applied. So I would also offer that due to adulteration, clinical trials should include more detailed methods sections that chemically characterize the essential oil that was tested. So for example, in the bergamot trial where I showed you that it showed in one trial that it reduced anxiety and in the other it said that it didn't reduce anxiety. Neither of those studies chemically characterized the bergamot that they used, meaning that researchers later on down the line could not replicate the study because they didn't know what bergamot was used. They didn't know what its chemical constituents were. Without these kinds of essential oil publication standards, reproducibility and applicability will remain suspect in our industry, creating all sorts of problems as essential oils try to take their next step in the development and use by consumers to improve their health and wellness. Thank you so very much for your attention, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your conference.